Hello folks, I wanted to get back together with you on a Phantom Chronicles. I know it's been a couple of days since I've released anything. This one I want to specifically answer a question that somebody had. So this is really a plastic modeling answers type of scenario rather than actually building the Phantom. But the question was, what are all the different kinds of clamps that I have and how do I use them? And really, clamps is only the first part of it. As you can see, we have rubber bands. We even have a zip tie and some tape here. So I want to kind of go around the room or around the desk here to kind of give you an idea of the different types of clamps or different types of bonding mechanisms I've used. First thing though is I want to share with you that I've learned over the past couple of years, just the past couple of years, and I've been modeling for 45 years-ish now, and I just learned how important these things are. Of course, many years ago, I used rubber bands, and I still use rubber bands from time to time. But these things have really become important in the past couple of years, as I have found that by clamping them, even some of the smallest pieces, and then allowing them to sit for a couple of hours or even overnight really makes a difference in how a bond is achieved between two parts on the model and how tightly that bond is held. So let's go around the bench here and just kind of identify what kind of items I have. So first of all, this is actually a standard construction or woodworking clamp. You can see it's a fairly small clamp. You can buy these at Ace Hardware, Lowe's, Home Depot, places like that. What I really like about these clamps is they can handle very large parts. Okay, 1 in 32 scale, 1 in 48 scale models that have like tall pieces or something. They can really help with that. So for example, when I finally get the wing on here on this Phantom, if I wanted to, I could probably clamp it and hold it together like this in order to get a nice solid bond there. I would do that and let it sit overnight. So in order to work these, they have a little trigger that you can apply as little or as much pressure as you want. So if you apply too much and it starts to bend apart, then you just pull back on this trigger and it opens it up. So these probably about $10 a piece. I've got about 6 of them laying around my bench. That's probably all you need is about 3 or 4 of them, to be honest with you. The next thing I want to talk about are these guys here. Actually, these two are the same, but I've got them set up differently. So this is your standard clamp. I bought this at Menards. You buy them. There's a whole big like tube you get where you get different sizes and different types inside of them. There's probably 3 different sizes. Now, what I like about this is, first of all, you got your standard clamp like that, right? But what I've learned is that you can flip these pads backwards, if you will, and you can put rounded parts in or different kinds of parts, and you can get a grip inside of here. Also, a nice rounded grip might occur inside of that. So really, this is kind of a 3-way clamp that you can use. And again, these two are the same size. This is a smaller version of that same thing. There's your middle rounded type of clamp. And then you could pop these pads back and you can get a little bit of a pointed grip inside of there for perhaps a flat part, and then your typical clamp inside there. You can see I use my finger a lot. Here's another clamp that people don't think about a lot, but this is one that I use for small parts painting. So here's a piece of a landing gear, for example. And if I'm going to paint this white, I might put the very bottom of it in there and then pop up the airbrush and rotate that puppy around like this. But not only can it be used for that, but let's say you got a scenario here with the wing and you wanted to, you could use it as a clamp on there. Now it's not as good. You can see it's got a little bit of it will bend and even fall off. So it's really a small parts type of clamp. I've used these for putting maybe wheels together, for example. So if I were to put these two halves together, perhaps I'll put this over the top of the wheel and keep that in there in that manner. So that's just a pair of reverse, I call them, but reverse tweezers type of thing. So there's that. You can get those from Squadron, from Sprue Brothers, many different places. Now here's another one that I can get from Menards. This has rubber pads on them. They have some pretty decent tension that goes on here. I use this one for a long type of situation. So if I needed to apply some pressure up in this area here, that allows me to do that. Now, unlike those other clamps, there's not much that goes on. I suppose you could, but there's no tread, if you will. There's no grip inside of here that might indicate that it would be used in multiple ways. So typically these are what I call long clamping type of situations. We're going to come back to that one in just a moment. These are some clamps. Again, I'm not a fan of these. I know a lot of people use them, but I think that where a lot of people use them, very similar to how I use this one, I just find this one, the blue one here, to be rather flimsy. It's a very similar type of environment. You could pull back on it, and then there's no trigger, if you will, to clamp it down. You just have to use your fingers and kind of push it up. Got this at Hobby Lobby for 40% off, a couple bucks. I wouldn't say don't get them. I wouldn't worry about it if you don't have them. Now here's somewhat of a homemade one. So this is a gator clip. It's frequently used in electronics. I went and bought these gators from my local Ace Hardware or any other hardware store. And then I bought just some small dowel rods, shoved it up in there and twisted the screw in order to keep them in there. And then you've got this dowel rod. Now, what I use this for is very similar to the landing gear scenario that I would use with that pair of tweezers. If I'm going to paint this, perhaps I'll put it in like this, and then when I am done painting it, in order for it to dry, I'll put it in a piece of styrofoam like this and just let it sit there and dry. I've not found that to be the best thing to put into the styrofoam before you paint it. It's only after you paint it, because I've had it where it blew down. The airbrush pushed it down. Now, the same thing exists. Now, these guys right here are a Gunzy product that I picked up at a local hobby shop, actually MRS Hobby out in Salt Lake City, but they're a guns product. They have the point on the bottom of them, so very similar type of scenario. You want to stab it into a piece of styrofoam after you've clamped it down and held it. You can do that, but these things have a little bit of spring to them. So even like the wing here, I actually use them on the edges of wings like this. And you can't stick it in the styrofoam when you use it on the edge of wings, but you can with smaller parts. So for example, if you have the tail piece here and it was two halves, perhaps that you needed to go together, you could do something like this, paint it, and then stick it in there. So that's now another thing I really like about this. It's got like a swivel head on it too, swivel head and swivel base. So it's got these sockets, if you will, where you can bend it in different ways. So that's very effective, very neat to utilize. We have your trusty standby, which is the if you're on a budget, these guys are very good stuff to have. Again, very useful to clamp down wings or small parts. These are just clothespins. And again, a lot of people use it in this manner, but don't forget, you could also use it with that rounded edge, farther back on a rounded type of situation. So, fuel tanks, for example, pop that in there. There you go. You can go to a Dollar Tree and buy these things for probably 30 of them or 20 of them or whatever, for hardly anything. Trusty standby with your your rubber band. You know, one of the reasons I've gone away from the rubber bands is because I found that they actually kind of, once you rotate them around a couple of times, you really have to be careful, because you could see here they pull in on the parts. They're still good though. The other thing I found with these is that the glue, you know, for example, if you've got a seam up here and then you put the thing on the glue, will eat that rubber away. So not a bad option. I have them. I have them in my my plan of attack, if you will, but don't use them very often. All right, so here's something. There's 3 different versions of these, 4 different versions of these. These are things I picked up at the office supply store, okay? These are paper clips, if you will. You can see they've got some pretty decent tension on it, but what I really like is I like that flat edge. They don't have the teeth. They've got that flat edge, so don't buy the ones with the teeth. They'll kill you if you buy the ones with the teeth. And I use these for the wings. Now, I said that I've got 4 different types of them. Okay, there's a big one. Here's a small one. You know, perhaps I'll put that on there. Then this one is interesting as well. It's got a little bit of a round inside of it, and so the clamp part actually just hits, you know, you kind of see it in my finger. It just hits that little bitty point there. So if you've got a particular pressure point, so where these guys have flat pressure points, this one's got particular pressure point you put on there. And then this one, again, another old-fashioned paper clip. And again, it's got a little bit of a specific pressure point on there instead of a large flat surface. So you can use that. There's one other clamp or 2 other clamps. Okay, so there's tape. You know, everybody's probably used tape, where you take tape and you just, you know, you tape a surface. This is my frog tape. You can get at any painting supply store. You just hold it down and then wrap it around. That applies a minimal pressure to the point. It works. It's not my favorite scenario. Now, there's one piece left that may surprise you a little bit. But if you have a rounded fuselage, here's my kinetic carrier that you really need to hold together. Now, these are one-time use deals. These are zip ties. Let's say you wanted that space right there to have a clamp function on it at whatever pressure you wanted it to be on, but you can use that to hold that pressure in there at whatever pressure you desire. Problem with that is, like I said, these things are one-time use, so you need to have a whole bunch of them. I just blasted that one. The other thing that's important is to make sure that you do it so that the insides, you know, like this thing, for whatever reason, the zip piece of it is not on the inside of it. In order to get what this does, this allows for proper distributed pressure on the entire round surface, and I've used that to quite a great effect. Now, there's a couple of things I want to show you about these clamps that is also very useful. Have a shim. There you go, contractor grade shims. Have those with you as well. You might be asking me, why would I do that? Okay, if you got a situation where perhaps your clamps don't reach all the way across, by applying this clamp with the shim across the space, you can put your clamps on the outside of the space. I have to be careful I don't mess up the aileron there, and that will apply a pressure all the way across the entire flat space. Now it has to be flat. So that's one thing you could do, in a little bit of ingenuity with clamps. The other thing that I like to do with clamps is when you have parts, like let's say this rudder here, you want that rudder to be really straight and you want it to stay that way. Once you put the glue in there and then you put the rudder in, I'll clamp that like this. And what it's doing is it's holding that rudder straight. And I'll leave it like that all night, so that, you know, let's say I didn't do that and I just propped it up. I might come in the morning and find that that rudder has fallen or shifted into a left rudder, in this case, a left rudder situation. Whereas that will keep it perfectly straight. The other thing that can be very useful for with these clamps is, in the case, again, this tail piece, all right? So this fin cap here, they give you different fin caps because the different RWR, radar warning receivers and things like that, that are on the ECM gear and stuff, that are on the different tails of different Phantoms. So they give you different fin caps. And again, you want that one to be perfectly straight up and down. You know, you want it on there like that. And so what do? You glue it in, and then you take one of your clamps and you cross both the fin cap and the tail itself, and that gives you, and then you let it sit overnight or for a couple hours or whatever, and then you've got a perfectly vertical, in place tail. How else might that work? Let's say in this particular case, I actually want my ailerons to not be flat against the wing, but let's say I wanted to be flat against the wing. I'm going to really put a risk here, but I would, and these have been glued for a couple of days, but I would put these two together and clamp it down. I'm not going to risk it. I'm not going to risk breaking it. But if I wanted them to be completely flat across there, I could do it that way. So that's those are my clamps. Some of them aren't clamps, some just clamping functions. Those are the things I use, and hopefully that is of some value to somebody out there. They can think about, you know, running down to their Ace or their Lowe's or their Home Depot or whatever and picking up a couple of these things. You really can. I mean, you know, these things are probably, these are some of the things I use more frequently than anything, and these are probably $1 a piece at Menards. If you're not in the Midwest US, then, you know, a Lowe's or a Home Depot. Menards is a lower cost type of Lowe's or Home Depot. These things, you get a whole bucket of about 20 of these different sized items for $10. These are probably your more expensive ones. Again, these are probably running about $10 a piece, but they're well worth the price. And then if you go to an Office Depot, even you can even go to Walmart and pick these things up you can pick up a whole bucket of them, you know, like 10 or 15 of them, which is all you'll need for just a few dollars. So all those things are relatively cheap. They're not free, but they're relatively cheap, and I've collected them over the years to the point I've got an entire, well, you know, we'll just carefully move this video over here. I've got an entire bucket full of various clamps, and I use them all. So there you go. Hopefully it's helpful for somebody.